What happens when the galaxy's most feared warriors witness something so terrifying that their weapons drop from trembling claws? What could make battle-hardened aliens who've conquered 1,000 worlds freeze in absolute horror? The answer isn't a superweapon. It isn't some ancient cosmic force. It's something humans do for fun on weekends. When the Kethvar Empire's elite shock troopers landed on Earth expecting another quick conquest, they thought they understood warfare. They thought they knew fear. They thought humans would be just another primitive species to crush under their boots. They were wrong about everything. What they discovered in a simple Earth stadium would shatter their understanding of combat, courage, and what it truly means to fight without fear. Some knowledge changes you forever. Some sights can never be unseen. And some games reveal the true nature of a species that the galaxy was never prepared to meet. This is the story of the day the universe's most dangerous predators learned what terror really looks like. Commander Zektar flexed his razor-sharp claws as the dropship descended through Earth's atmosphere. Around him, 40 of the Kethvar Empire's most elite warriors checked their plasma rifles and combat armor. The ship's hull groaned under atmospheric pressure, but not one of the alien soldiers showed concern. They had done this dance 1,000 times before on 1,000 different worlds. The Kethvar stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick chitinous plates covering their muscular frames. Their forearms ended in claws that could slice through steel, and their elongated skulls housed brains capable of calculating battlefield tactics in microseconds. For 3 centuries, they had been the galaxy's apex predators, the Empire's unstoppable force that turned civilizations to dust. Primary target analysis complete, announced Sub-Commander Veldaz, his secondary arms manipulating a holographic display. The humans appear to have gathered in massive numbers at various locations across their largest population centers. Intelligence suggests ritual gatherings of some kind. Zektar's mandibles clicked in amusement. Probably religious ceremonies. Primitive species always turn to their gods when they sense their end approaching. He gestured to the display showing thermal readings of huge crowds. Look at how they cluster together like frightened prey animals. The ship's AI chimed in with its cold, mechanical voice. Approaching designated landing zone. Human structures identified as recreational facilities. No defensive fortifications detected. No military presence observed. Through the viewport, Zektar could see the sprawling human city below. Millions of lights twinkled in the gathering dusk, and he could make out massive oval-shaped structures surrounded by what appeared to be primitive ground vehicles. The humans had indeed gathered in enormous numbers, just as the reconnaissance reports indicated. Standard shock doctrine applies, Zektar announced to his troops. We land, establish dominance through superior firepower, and proceed with pacification protocols. The Empire's xenobiologists want live specimens, so keep the initial casualties to acceptable parameters. The warriors around him checked their weapons one final time. Each Kethvar carried enough firepower to level a small building. Their plasma rifles could punch through 3 feet of reinforced concrete, and their personal energy shields could deflect most primitive ballistic weapons. They wore battle armor that had been tested against everything from nuclear radiation to acid baths. As the ship touched down in what appeared to be a large flat area surrounded by those oval structures, Zektar felt the familiar rush of pre-battle anticipation. Another world would fall today. Another species would learn that resistance was futile. Thermal imaging shows approximately 100,000 humans gathered in the nearest structure, reported Veldaz. They appear to be stationary. Possibly in some kind of hibernation state or meditation. Zektar's eyes narrowed. Strange behavior for a species about to be invaded, but then, again, most primitive races did strange things when faced with extinction. Some fought uselessly. Others tried to hide. A few even welcomed their conquerors as gods. The humans would probably fall into one of these predictable categories. The rear hatch hissed open, and the smell of Earth's atmosphere filled the ship. Zektar inhaled deeply, analyzing the chemical composition with his enhanced senses. Oxygen, nitrogen, traces of various pollutants from their industrial civilization. Nothing threatening to Kethvar physiology. Move out, he commanded. 40 elite warriors poured from the ship in perfect formation. Their claws clicked against the strange flat surface beneath their feet. Zektar examined it more closely and realized it was some kind of hardened stone mixture, poured in vast sheets and marked with colored lines. Primitive but functional. The nearest oval structure loomed ahead of them, easily 500 meters long and 300 meters wide. Light poured from its interior, and they could hear a constant low rumble emanating from within. The sound was rhythmic, almost like breathing, but amplified 1,000-fold. "That noise," whispered Scout Thekvar, his head tilting as his enhanced hearing analyzed the sound waves. "It's voices. Thousands and thousands of voices, all making noise together." Zektar activated his personal scanner and pointed it at the structure. The readings were bizarre. The thermal imaging showed humans packed together in impossible density, yet there were no signs of panic or distress. Whatever was happening inside, the humans seemed calm about it. "Perhaps they're in some kind of trance state," suggested Veldaz. Many primitive species have been known to enter group hypnosis when faced with overwhelming stress. The Kethvar force approached the structure, weapons ready but not immediately threatening. Their standard protocol called for psychological warfare first. Let the enemy see their superior equipment and numbers, allow fear to do most of the work. It was usually more effective than an immediate slaughter. As they reached what appeared to be an entrance, Zektar could see through transparent panels into the structure's interior. What he saw made him pause for the first time in his military career. The humans were arranged in tiered rows that rose high into the air, thousands upon thousands of them. They all faced toward a large flat area in the center where additional humans were moving around in organized patterns. The noise was definitely coming from all those human mouths, but it wasn't screaming or crying. They were cheering. Zekvar studied the scene more carefully, his tactical mind trying to process what he was observing. The humans in the center area wore different colored coverings and appeared to be engaged in some kind of coordinated movement. They would run in short bursts, then stop, then run again. Occasionally they would fall down, but instead of staying down, they would get back up and continue their strange dance. "Commander," said Thekvar, his voice uncertain for the first time since Zektar had known him. "I don't think this is a religious ceremony." Before Zektar could respond, a human appeared near the entrance. This one was smaller than the others, wearing a bright yellow covering and carrying a small device in one hand. The human looked at the 40 heavily armed alien warriors standing outside and did something that no being in the galaxy had ever done when first encountering the Kethvar Empire. He smiled and walked toward them. "Hey there," the human called out in a friendly tone that Zektar's universal translator converted into understandable speech. "You guys here for the game? Tickets are still available if you want to catch the second half. Fair warning though, it's been a pretty intense match so far." The human stopped about 10 feet away from 40 of the deadliest warriors in known space and continued talking as if they were old friends meeting for lunch. "You fellows are definitely not from around here. Love the armor, by the way. Very intimidating. You with one of those immersive experience companies? The special effects are incredible." Zektar's mandibles worked silently as he tried to process this interaction. In 3 centuries of conquest, no primitive being had ever mistaken his shock troopers for entertainment. The human showed no fear, no recognition of danger, no survival instincts whatsoever. You believe we are here for entertainment purposes?" Zektar asked, his voice a low growl that should have sent any intelligent being running for their life. "Well, either that or you're the most dedicated cosplayers I've ever seen," the human replied with a laugh. "Though I gotta say, the realism is off the charts. Those claws look sharp enough to cut glass. How do you even type with those things?" Several of Zektar's warriors shifted nervously. This was not going according to any scenario they had trained for. The human continued chatting happily, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was standing within arm's reach of creatures that could rip him apart without effort. "So what brings you to Earth anyway?" the human asked. "Tourism? Business? I'm Dave, by the way. I work security here at the stadium. Well, mostly I just check tickets and make sure nobody brings in outside food, but they call it security." Zektar realized his mouth was hanging open. This was perhaps the most surreal conversation of his entire military career. "We are here to evaluate your species for conquest," he said slowly, still not quite believing he was having to explain this. Dave nodded enthusiastically. "Oh cool, you're doing like a documentary thing? Like National Geographic but for alien civilizations? That's awesome. You picked a great day for it too. This is the championship game, so you're seeing humanity at its most passionate. Just wait until you see what happens when someone scores a touchdown. The alien commander looked at his troops, who were staring back at him with expressions of complete bewilderment. In the background, the rhythmic roar of the crowd continued, punctuated by sudden explosive cheers that made several warriors flinch instinctively. Dave, Zektar said carefully, what exactly is happening inside this structure? Football game, Dave replied as if this explained everything. Two teams, 60 players total, trying to get an oval-shaped ball from one end of a field to the other while the opposing team tries to stop them. Pretty simple concept, but the execution gets pretty wild. Zektar processed this information. And the humans gather in such numbers to observe this contest? Buddy, this is nothing. You should see the Super Bowl. They get over 100 million viewers for that one. Though I guess with your documentary, you'll probably want to film during different seasons to show the variety. We got baseball in summer, basketball in winter, hockey year-round. Americans love their sports. One of the warriors, Kelshawn, stepped forward. Commander, with respect, I think we should observe this football game before proceeding with invasion protocols. Intelligence clearly failed to provide adequate information about human cultural practices. Zektar found himself nodding. The tactical situation had become so unusual that standard procedures seemed inadequate. Very well. Dave, would it be possible for my film crew to observe this contest? Sure thing. Dave beamed. Though you might want to lose some of the weapons if you're going inside. Stadium policy, you understand. Nothing personal, just insurance liability stuff. The thought of disarming his troops in potentially hostile territory went against every instinct Zektar possessed. But the human showed no signs of deception or trap-laying. He genuinely seemed to think they were some kind of entertainment production team. We'll keep our equipment, Zektar decided. For the documentary. Dave shrugged. Your call. Follow me, and try to keep the formation loose. We don't want to block anyone's view. As they walked through the entrance, several humans glanced at the HFY warriors with mild interest before returning their attention to small screens or food items they were consuming. A few pointed and made positive comments about the costumes and special effects, but none showed alarm. Zektar was beginning to understand why the Empire's intelligence reports had been so confused about human behavior patterns. These beings operated under social frameworks that made no tactical sense whatsoever. They emerged into the main arena, and the sound hit them like a physical force. 100,000 humans were indeed packed into rising tiers of seats, and their collective voice created a wall of noise that resonated in the HFY warriors' chest cavities. But it wasn't the sound that made Zektar stop dead in his tracks. It was what was happening on the field below. 22 humans in protective gear were engaged in what could only be described as ritualized combat. But, as Zektar watched, his understanding of human nature began to fundamentally shift. These weren't trained soldiers. Based on their movements and tactical decisions, most appeared to be quite young, possibly barely adults. And they were throwing themselves at each other with a ferocity that would have impressed HFY shock troopers. As the 40 alien warriors watched in growing amazement, one human caught the oval object out of the air while running at full speed. Immediately, 11 other humans began pursuing him with clear intent to bring him down through physical force. The human carrying the object didn't try to avoid conflict. Instead, he deliberately ran straight toward the largest of his pursuers. The collision was audible even over the crowd noise. Both humans went down hard, their bodies hitting the ground with an impact that would have stunned most galactic species. The human who had been carrying the object got back up immediately, apparently uninjured, and jogged back to his team while the crowd erupted in appreciative roars. By the void, whispered Veldaz. They're intentionally engaging in combat for recreational purposes. Dave, who had been watching the aliens' reactions with amusement, noticed their expressions. First time seeing American football? Yeah, it takes some getting used to if you're from a different culture. These guys are tough as nails, I'll give them that. Zektar was beginning to feel something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. His claws were retracting involuntarily, and his defensive stance was shifting to something more resembling wariness than confidence. Dave, he said slowly, how often do humans engage in this activity? Football season runs from September through February. But, if you're talking about sports in general, pretty much constantly. We got professional leagues, college levels, high school teams, youth leagues. Millions of people playing at different levels all across the country. The alien commander did rapid calculations. Millions of humans engaging in deliberate physical combat on a regular basis, purely for enjoyment. The implications were staggering. On the field below, the action had resumed. This time, the humans formed two lines facing each other and, at some apparently predetermined signal, slammed together with coordinated violence. Bodies flew, humans grunted and shouted, and the crowd cheered louder with each impact. HFY's scanner was running continuous analysis of the scene. Commander, the force measurements from these collisions are significant. These humans are generating impact forces that would require protective equipment for most galactic species to survive. And they're doing it for fun, added Kalshan, his voice hollow. Dave was warming to his subject. Oh, this is nothing compared to hockey. Those guys hit each other with sticks and slide around on ice while doing it. Or rugby, where they don't even wear protective gear. You want to see humans get really intense, film a rugby match. Zektar felt his primary heart skip a beat. They engage in more extreme versions of this activity? Buddy, we got combat sports that make football look like a gentle massage. Mixed martial arts, boxing, wrestling. People pay good money to watch other people beat the hell out of each other. It's one of our most popular forms of entertainment. The HFY commander realized he was experiencing something his species had no word for. It was beyond confusion, beyond surprise. He was watching his fundamental understanding of reality collapse in real time. As they stood there, processing this impossible information, the human crowd suddenly exploded into the loudest cheer yet. On the field, one of the players had managed to carry the ball across a painted line, triggering what Dave informed them was called a touchdown. The celebration that followed defied every assumption the HFY had ever made about primitive species. The humans didn't just applaud. They screamed, they jumped, they embraced strangers, they performed complex coordinated chants, and some of them appeared to be crying tears of joy. All because 22 members of their species had successfully completed a simulated battle exercise. Your people, Zektar said carefully, become emotionally invested in the outcomes of these games? Dave looked at him as if he'd asked why water was wet. Emotionally invested? Buddy, some people plan their entire year around football season. Families pass down team loyalty through generations. Cities shut down when their team makes it to the championship. This isn't just entertainment, it's a way of life. As if to emphasize his point, a group of humans several rows up began an intricate chant that was immediately picked up by thousands of other voices. The sound rolled through the stadium like thunder, and Zektar felt his body's natural threat response systems activating. He was beginning to understand that the HFY Empire had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human civilization. These weren't primitive beings cowering before their technological superiors. These were creatures who turned violence into art, competition into religion, and physical confrontation into celebration. The humans weren't afraid of conflict. They had made it their primary form of entertainment. And, as the game continued below, with humans throwing themselves at each other with increasing intensity while 100,000 spectators screamed approval, Zektar began to suspect that his shock troopers might not be the apex predators they had always believed themselves to be. The real revelation, however, was still to come. The second quarter of the game brought revelations that challenged everything the HFY thought they knew about warfare and civilization. Zektar and his warriors had positioned themselves in an area Dave called the concourse, where they could observe both the field action and the human spectators without blocking views. What they witnessed defied every military doctrine in the Empire's databases. The humans on the field had organized themselves into two distinct factions, each wearing different colored protective gear. But, unlike any civilized species the HFY had encountered, these factions weren't simply trying to eliminate each other. Instead, they had developed an elaborate set of rules that governed their conflict, turning violence into a precise art form. Observe the tactical formations, Veldaz murmured, his secondary arms manipulating recording devices while his primary hands gripped his weapon nervously. They're using coordinated attack patterns that would challenge our own strategic planners. On the field below, the humans had arranged themselves in a complex formation. 11 warriors faced 11 others across a painted line, each side calculating angles, timing, and individual matchups. When the ball was put into play, they executed maneuvers that required split-second timing and absolute trust in their teammates. But it was what happened when the formations collapsed into combat that truly disturbed the alien observers. A human carrying the ball found himself surrounded by 3 opposing players, each easily weighing over 200 pounds and moving at significant speed. Instead of attempting to negotiate or surrender, the human lowered his shoulder and deliberately initiated contact with the largest pursuer. The collision echoed through the stadium. Both combatants hit the ground hard enough to rattle the HFY observers' bones. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, not horror at the violence, but appreciation for the courage displayed. "Unbelievable," whispered Scout Thekvar. "That human chose to engage superior numbers rather than avoid conflict. And his tribe celebrates the decision even though he was brought down." Dave, who had appointed himself their unofficial guide, noticed their fascination. "That's what we call running hard or fighting for extra yards. The guy could have stepped out of bounds to avoid the hit, but that's not how champions are made." Zektar's translator struggled with several of the concepts Dave was expressing. "You mean to say that avoiding tactical disadvantage is considered dishonorable?" "Not dishonorable exactly, just not great football. Look, these guys train their whole lives to be here. They're not going to take the easy way out when millions of people are watching. Pride means something." The alien commander was beginning to realize that human pride operated under completely different parameters than anything in his experience. HFY pride was based on survival, dominance, and the accumulation of resources. Human pride, apparently, was based on willingly entering situations where survival was uncertain. As the game progressed, the violence escalated. The humans began employing increasingly aggressive tactics. They threw themselves through gaps barely wide enough for their bodies. They launched their bodies through the air to make catches while knowing they would be hit immediately upon landing. They engaged in hand-to-hand combat at the line of scrimmage that would have qualified as assault in most civilized systems. And the crowd loved every second of it. "Vel'Vuz," Zektar said quietly, "are you recording physiological data on these humans?" "Yes, Commander. The readings are disturbing. Their heart rates remain elevated but controlled throughout these violent encounters. Stress hormones are present but not at panic levels. It appears they've trained their bodies to function optimally under conditions of physical threat." Thekvar added, "Moreover, their tactical decision-making doesn't deteriorate under pressure. If anything, they seem to perform better when the stakes are highest." On the field, this observation was being demonstrated in real time. With only 2 minutes left in the first half, the trailing team was attempting to score. The pressure was enormous: millions of viewers, significant consequences for failure, and a defense that was determined to prevent any success. The humans responded to this pressure by becoming more aggressive, not less. Their quarterback, the apparent field commander, took risks that would have horrified HFY military tacticians. He threw the ball into areas where enemy defenders outnumbered his own players. When those risky strategies succeeded, the crowd's response bordered on hysteria. "Dave," Zektar asked, "what happens if these humans are seriously injured during this contest?" Dave pointed to the sidelines, where Zektar noticed additional humans in different uniforms. "Medical staff. They've got doctors, physical therapists, emergency equipment. If someone gets hurt bad enough, they go to the hospital. But most of these guys play through minor injuries. It's part of the culture." "They continue fighting while wounded?" "Sure. Unless it's something that could cause permanent damage, most players want to stay in the game. Getting pulled for an injury when your team needs you is tough to accept." Kelshawn was monitoring communications frequencies and picked up something that made his scales ripple with unease. "Commander, I'm detecting massive data transmission spikes across the human communication networks. This event is being broadcast to millions of additional humans who are not physically present." Zektar processed this information. "You mean to tell me that millions of humans are voluntarily observing this violence from remote locations?" Dave overheard and laughed. "Millions? Buddy, this is the championship game. We're probably looking at a global audience of over 2 billion people. This is one of the most watched events in human civilization. 2 billion. The number hit the HFY like a physical blow. 2 billion members of a species choosing to spend their time watching ritualized combat, celebrating the participants' willingness to endure pain and injury for the entertainment of others. And this is normal behavior for your species?" Vel'Vuz asked weakly. "Completely normal. We've got thousands of sports at different levels happening simultaneously across the planet. Professional leagues, amateur competitions, school programs. On any given day, millions of humans are either participating in or watching competitive physical contests. The implications were staggering. The Kethvar had assumed they were dealing with a primitive species that would be terrified by superior military technology. Instead, they had encountered a civilization that had turned warfare into entertainment and raised multiple generations on the idea that physical confrontation was not only acceptable but admirable. As the second quarter wound down, the action on the field intensified even further. Both teams seemed to recognize that they were running out of time to establish dominance before the intermission. The hits became harder, the strategies more desperate, and the crowd's energy reached levels that were actually registering on the Kethvar's acoustic sensors. Then, something happened that fundamentally changed how every alien observer understood human nature. A human player caught the ball near the sideline and found himself facing three defenders converging on his position. Instead of stepping out of bounds to avoid contact or attempting to maneuver around the threat, he made a decision that defied every survival instinct known to galactic civilization. He turned directly toward the defenders and accelerated. The collision involved four humans moving at maximum speed, generating forces that the Kethvar's instruments measured as equivalent to small vehicle accidents. Bodies flew, equipment scattered, and the sound of the impact was audible throughout the stadium. When the pile of humans separated, the player who had initiated the contact was back on his feet first, helping one of the defenders up, and jogging toward his teammates as if nothing unusual had happened. The crowd was screaming its approval, and his teammates were celebrating the courage he had displayed. "He chose that," whispered Thekvar. He could have avoided the confrontation entirely, but he deliberately initiated contact with superior numbers because it served his team's strategic objectives. Zektar was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had witnessed. In Kethvar military doctrine, such a decision would be analyzed as either tactical brilliance or temporary insanity. But these humans seemed to view it as simply the expected behavior of someone who belonged on this battlefield. "Dave, how do humans prepare for participation in these contests?" Zektar asked. "Training starts young, usually in childhood. Kids learn the basics in youth leagues, then move up through school programs if they show talent and dedication. The guys you're watching today have been playing organized football for probably 15 to 20 years. 15 years of training for ritualized combat? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of intense. But, yeah, basically. These are the best of the best. They've dedicated their lives to being able to perform at this level." Veldaz was frantically taking notes. "Commander, we need to consider the implications for our invasion timeline. If humans begin military training in childhood and view physical confrontation as entertainment, their combat readiness levels are likely far higher than intelligence estimates suggested." Before Zektar could respond, the action on the field took another turn that challenged their understanding even further. With 30 seconds left in the half, one team was attempting a final scoring opportunity. Their strategy involved throwing the ball to a receiver who would be running directly into coverage from multiple defenders. The human caught the ball in midair while three enemies closed on his position. Instead of protecting himself from the incoming collision, he maintained focus on securing the ball and advancing as far as possible before impact. The hit, when it came, was devastating. But he held on to the ball. As medical personnel checked on the receiver, who was slow to get up, the crowd's response wasn't sympathy or concern. It was admiration. They were celebrating his willingness to absorb punishment in service of his team's goals. "Your species views the endurance of pain as virtuous?" Zektar asked Dave. "Not pain for its own sake, but toughness in the face of adversity, yeah. These guys know they're going to get hurt. That's part of the game. What matters is whether you let that stop you from doing your job." Kelshawn pointed to the scoreboard. "The numerical displays suggest this contest has predetermined time limits. What happens when the time expires? Game ends, one team wins, one team loses. Then, they start preparing for next season. And the humans who lose, what happens to them?" Dave looked puzzled. "They go home disappointed. Work harder in the off-season. Try again next year if they get the chance." The concept of accepting defeat without immediate retaliation was foreign to Kethvar psychology. In their culture, losing a battle meant death or exile. The idea that humans would voluntarily enter contests where defeat was possible, then accept that defeat and prepare to try again, suggested a completely different relationship with conflict and failure. As halftime approached and the players began leaving the field, Zektar gathered his officers for a tactical assessment. "Preliminary observations?" he asked. Valdez spoke first. "Commander, we may need to revise our threat assessment protocols. These humans demonstrate pain tolerance, tactical coordination, and psychological resilience that exceed standard parameters for primitive species." Thekvar nodded agreement. "Moreover, their cultural conditioning appears to celebrate rather than discourage aggressive behavior. Standard psychological warfare techniques may be ineffective." Kelshawn added, "The population density at this single event suggests massive organizational capabilities. If they can coordinate the voluntary gathering of 100,000 individuals for entertainment purposes, their potential for military mobilization is significant." Zektar listened to his officers' concerns while watching the human crowd. During the break in action, they weren't dispersing or becoming subdued. Instead, they were analyzing what they had witnessed, debating tactical decisions, and expressing passionate opinions about strategy and performance. These beings didn't just watch violence, they understood it, studied it, and formed emotional attachments to its execution. "Dave," he said, during this intermission, "do the humans simply wait for the contest to resume?" "Oh no, halftime is a whole production. Marching bands, entertainment, analysis of the first half performance. People use the time to grab food, discuss what they've seen, predict what's going to happen in the second half." "They analyze the tactical elements?" "Absolutely. Football fans are incredibly knowledgeable about strategy, player capabilities, coaching decisions. You'll hear debates about whether the quarterback should have thrown to a different receiver, whether the defense should have used a different formation, all kinds of technical stuff." Zektar felt something that might have been the beginning of respect, mixed with a growing sense of unease. These humans weren't just participants or passive observers, they were students of organized conflict, capable of tactical analysis and strategic thinking. As the halftime entertainment began, featuring coordinated human movements and musical displays that demonstrated additional layers of organizational complexity, the Ketvar commander made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. "We're staying for the second half," he announced to his troops. His officers exchanged uncertain glances, but none argued. They were all beginning to sense that they had encountered something unprecedented in their military experience. What they would witness in the third and fourth quarters would complete their transformation from confident conquerors to deeply disturbed observers of a species that had apparently evolved beyond their understanding of what intelligent life was supposed to be like. The second half was about to begin, and the real lessons were just getting started. The third quarter brought weather that would have sent most galactic species seeking shelter. Dark clouds had gathered during halftime, and, as the teams returned to the field, a cold rain began falling steadily. The temperature dropped noticeably, and winds started gusting across the stadium. The humans' response to these deteriorating conditions provided the Ketvar with another disturbing insight into their psychology. They cheered louder. "Dave," Zektar asked, water running off his chitinous armor, "will the contest be postponed due to weather conditions?" Dave looked at him as if he had suggested canceling breathing. "Postponed? For a little rain? Buddy, this is football weather. The worse the conditions get, the better the game usually becomes." Valdez was monitoring environmental readings with growing disbelief. "Commander, the ambient temperature has dropped to levels that would require thermal protection for most species. The precipitation is affecting visibility and making surfaces slippery. Tactical doctrine would suggest suspending operations until conditions improve." On the field, the humans were demonstrating the opposite philosophy. As the rain intensified and the ground became muddy, they seemed to embrace the additional challenge. Players slid through the mud, their uniforms becoming increasingly filthy, their movements more difficult to execute. Their effort levels increased to compensate. "This is incredible," Dave said enthusiastically. "Weather games are the best. You get to see who really wants it, you know? Fairweather players don't last long when conditions get tough." Thekvar was documenting everything with his recording equipment. "They're not just tolerating adverse conditions, they appear to be energized by them. Hostile environment responses are typically stress-related, but these humans are showing increased focus and determination." The game itself had evolved into something that challenged every assumption about civilized behavior. With the field becoming increasingly treacherous, the humans adapted by becoming more physical, more aggressive, and more willing to sacrifice their bodies for strategic advantage. A running play early in the third quarter demonstrated this mentality in ways that left the HFY observers speechless. The human with the ball approached a defender who was positioned to make a routine tackle. Instead of attempting to avoid contact or minimize the collision, the runner lowered his head and drove directly into the defender's chest. Both humans went down hard, sliding several yards through the mud before coming to rest. When they got up, both were covered in mud, both were breathing heavily from the impact, and both were smiling. "They enjoy this," Kelshawn said quietly. Even the defensive player who was defeated in that encounter appeared pleased with the quality of the collision. Dave nodded approvingly. "Great hit by both guys." The runner showed he wasn't afraid to take on the tackle, and the defender didn't back down from contact. That's football at its best right there. Zektar was beginning to understand that human concepts of victory and defeat were far more nuanced than HFY thinking aloud. In his culture, losing a physical confrontation was shameful and potentially fatal. These humans seemed to find honor in the quality of their effort regardless of the outcome. As the quarter progressed, the rain turned into a full storm. Lightning flashed in the distance, and the wind reached speeds that made precise movements difficult. The HFY warriors, despite their advanced armor, were becoming uncomfortable. The human spectators responded by becoming more vocal and supportive. "Unbelievable," muttered Velduz. "Environmental conditions that would challenge our equipment are being treated as entertainment enhancement by these civilians." The players on the field were now operating under conditions that would have grounded most military aircraft. Visibility was limited, footing was treacherous, and the ball had become slippery enough that handling it required exceptional skill. The humans adapted by simplifying their strategies and relying more heavily on individual determination and teamwork. Plays that would have been routine in good weather became tests of character and commitment. Then, something happened that fundamentally altered every HFY observer's understanding of human psychology. One of the players, while attempting to catch the ball, was hit by two defenders simultaneously. The collision occurred just as he secured the ball, and the impact sent him flying backward into a metal post that supported the goal structure. The sound of his body hitting the post was audible throughout the stadium. He hit the ground and didn't move. Medical personnel rushed onto the field immediately. The stadium fell silent as they worked to assess his condition. For several minutes, the human remained motionless while doctors checked his responses and carefully stabilized his neck. Zektar expected panic, horror, or at least concern from the human spectators. What he observed instead challenged his understanding of how intelligent species were supposed to respond to injury among their own kind. The crowd began applauding. Not celebrating the injury, Dave quickly explained that distinction, but showing appreciation for the effort the player had made and supporting him during his medical evaluation. As the human was carefully loaded onto a mobile medical platform and transported off the field, 100,000 humans stood and cheered his courage. "Your people honor those who are wounded in combat?" Zek_Tar asked. "That guy laid everything on the line for his team," Dave replied. "Caught the ball in traffic, took a hell of a hit, held on for the completion." That's exactly what you want to see from a player. "We're not happy he got hurt, but we're damn proud of the heart he showed." The distinction was lost on the HFY. In their culture, becoming injured was evidence of tactical failure or inadequate preparation. The idea that a being could be honored for sustaining damage while attempting to achieve an objective was completely foreign to their psychology. As play resumed, something even more disturbing became apparent. The injury to their teammate didn't demoralize the human team, it motivated them. They began playing with increased intensity, as if honoring their fallen comrade required them to elevate their own performance. "Velduz," Zektar said quietly, "document this behavior pattern. When one of their warriors falls, the others don't retreat or become cautious. They become more aggressive." "Confirmed, Commander." It appears that witnessing injury to their allies serves as motivation rather than deterrent. This contradicts everything we know about self-preservation instincts in intelligent species. The third quarter continued with both teams fighting through conditions that were becoming genuinely dangerous. The field was now a muddy swamp, the ball was barely visible in the rain, and several players were showing signs of fatigue that would have hospitalized members of most galactic species. The humans kept playing. More than that, they seemed to be enjoying the additional challenge. Players were sliding, diving, and throwing their bodies around with apparent disregard for their own safety. When they succeeded in difficult circumstances, the crowd's appreciation was even greater than it had been during the easier first half. Dave, Zektar asked, what would it take for this contest to be suspended? Dave considered this seriously. Lightning strike on the field might do it, though even then, they'd probably just delay until it passed. I've seen games played in snow so deep you couldn't see the yard markers, wind so strong that passing was nearly impossible, heat so intense that players were collapsing from exhaustion. We pretty much play unless conditions become genuinely life-threatening. Thekvar was analyzing audio patterns from the crowd. Commander, the acoustic signatures suggest that these humans actually prefer difficult conditions. Their vocal responses are more positive when the players overcome environmental obstacles. This observation was being confirmed in real time. A quarterback had just completed a pass that required exceptional skill given the wind and rain. The crowd's response was far more enthusiastic than similar plays had received during good weather. They celebrate superior performance under adverse conditions, Kel_Sean observed. Achievement in challenging circumstances is valued more highly than the same achievement under normal conditions. The implications for military assessment were profound. If humans were psychologically conditioned to view difficult conditions as opportunities for enhanced performance rather than obstacles to be avoided, their combat effectiveness might actually increase when faced with hardship. As the third quarter neared its end, both teams were showing signs of physical exhaustion that would have required medical intervention for most species. Their uniforms were completely covered in mud, their movements were labored, and several players were clearly fighting through minor injuries. The quality of play had improved. This is impossible, whispered Vel_Thaz. Physical degradation should result in performance deterioration, but these humans are executing more complex strategies and showing better coordination than they did when fresh. Dave overhead and nodded appreciatively. Fourth quarter of a tough game is when you separate the champions from the pretenders. Anybody can play well when they're rested and comfortable. Greatness shows up when you're tired, hurt, and everything's on the line. The concept of greatness being defined by performance under maximum stress was antithetical to everything the Kethvar understood about intelligent behavior. Rational beings conserved resources, avoided unnecessary risks, and protected themselves from harm. These humans seemed to view those very tendencies as weaknesses to be overcome. As the teams changed positions for the fourth quarter, Zek_Tar noticed something that made his primary heart skip a beat. Many of the human spectators were standing despite the rain, continuing to cheer despite being soaked and cold, maintaining their emotional investment despite the deteriorating conditions. They weren't just watching a contest, they were participating in a test of endurance and commitment that included everyone in the stadium. Commander, Thekvar said urgently, I'm detecting unusual patterns in crowd behavior. The environmental stress appears to be creating group cohesion rather than individual withdrawal. Zek_Tar looked around the stadium and realized his scout was correct. Instead of seeking shelter or leaving early, the humans were drawing closer together, sharing warmth, and supporting each other through the difficult conditions. The adverse weather was strengthening their collective resolve rather than weakening it. Dave, he asked slowly, how do humans respond when their entire civilization faces environmental challenges? Usually by working together to find solutions. We're pretty good at that, actually. Wars, natural disasters, economic problems, we tend to pull together when things get really tough. The alien commander felt something that might have been the beginning of genuine fear. Not fear of human weapons or technology, but fear of human psychology. These beings had evolved social mechanisms that turned hardship into opportunity and individual suffering into collective strength. As the fourth quarter began, with both teams exhausted, injured, and operating under conditions that would have grounded most military operations, the humans began playing with an intensity that suggested they were just getting started. The Kethvar observers were about to witness something that would haunt their understanding of warfare for the rest of their lives, humans performing at their absolute peak when everything seemed lost. The final quarter was going to change everything the galaxy thought it knew about this supposedly primitive species. The fourth quarter began with both teams separated by a single point on the scoreboard and conditions that would have challenged the environmental suits of most galactic civilizations. The rain had turned to sleet, the field was a muddy swamp that made every step treacherous, and the wind was gusting hard enough to affect the trajectory of the ball. The humans responded to these impossible conditions by playing the most intense, technically brilliant, and psychologically demanding 15 minutes of competition the Kethvar had ever witnessed. Observe their tactical adaptation, Veldaz murmured, his recording equipment struggling to function in the moisture. They're not just enduring these conditions, they're using them as strategic weapons. On the field, both teams had modified their strategies to exploit the environmental chaos. Instead of viewing the mud and rain as obstacles, they were incorporating these elements into their tactical planning. Players used the slippery conditions to change direction more rapidly than their opponents expected. The unpredictable footing became a tool for misdirection. But it was the psychological transformation of the human players that truly disturbed the alien observers. As the quarter progressed and exhaustion mounted, the humans didn't become more cautious or conservative. They became more willing to take risks, more aggressive in their decision-making, and more committed to achieving objectives regardless of personal cost. A play midway through the quarter demonstrated this mentality in ways that challenged everything the Kethvar understood about rational behavior. Trailing by a point with time running out, one team faced a critical decision on fourth down, their final opportunity to advance the ball before surrendering possession to their opponents. The logical choice, according to every military doctrine in the Kethvar database, would be to attempt the lowest risk strategy with the highest probability of success. Instead, the humans chose the most dangerous option available. They attempted to throw the ball 30 yards downfield to a receiver who would be surrounded by defenders, in weather conditions that made accurate throwing nearly impossible, with the knowledge that failure would immediately end their chances of winning. They're choosing maximum risk when minimum risk would be strategically sound, Thekvar observed in amazement. This contradicts every principle of tactical decision-making. The throw, when it came, was a perfect spiral that cut through the wind and rain with precision that would have impressed Kethvar marksmen. The receiver, running at full speed toward a zone where three defenders waited, caught the ball in midair while knowing he would be hit immediately. The collision that followed involved four humans moving at maximum velocity, generating forces that registered on the Kethvar's impact sensors. Bodies flew, equipment scattered, and, for a moment it was impossible to tell who had possession of the ball. When the pile cleared, the receiver was on the ground, motionless, but still clutching the ball. The crowd exploded into the loudest noise the aliens had recorded yet, a sound that was part celebration, part admiration, part shared emotional release. But what happened next demonstrated something that fundamentally challenged Kethvar understanding of individual psychology. The receiver, clearly dazed from the impact, struggled to his feet and immediately began encouraging his teammates to hurry to the next play. Despite having just absorbed a collision that would have hospitalized most galactic species, his primary concern was maintaining the tactical momentum his sacrifice had created. "Dave," Zektar asked, his voice strained, "that human is clearly injured. Why is he continuing to participate?" Dave was screaming along with the rest of the crowd, but he paused to answer. "Because there are 2 minutes left in the championship game and his team needs him." "You think he's going to let a little pain stop him from being part of this?" The concept of a little pain being applied to an impact that had registered as moderate vehicular accident on their sensors was beyond Kethvar comprehension. But the humans' behavior was consistent with everything they had observed. Pain, injury, and exhaustion were viewed as obstacles to overcome rather than reasons to withdraw. As the quarter continued, both teams began operating at levels of intensity that defied their physical limitations. Players who had been showing signs of serious fatigue found reserves of energy that seemed to come from pure determination. Strategies became more complex and ambitious rather than simpler and safer. "Commander," Kelshawn reported, "I'm detecting physiological changes in both the players and the spectators. Adrenaline levels, heart rates, and neural activity are all spiking beyond normal parameters." Zektar could see the effects of these changes throughout the stadium. The human crowd had become a single organism focused entirely on the outcome of the contest. Individual differences in age, size, and physical condition seemed to disappear as the collective emotional investment reached critical levels. "They're achieving a form of group consciousness," Vel_Thaz observed. 100,000 individual intelligences functioning as a coordinated entity focused on a single objective. The observation was accurate. The crowd had begun moving and responding as one, their voices combining into chants that seemed to emerge spontaneously from different sections of the stadium. When their team faced adversity, the volume increased. When their team succeeded, the emotional release was visible as a wave of motion throughout the arena. With 90 seconds remaining, the trailing team faced another critical decision. They needed to advance the ball 80 yards against a defense that was determined to prevent any success, in conditions that made every play a test of individual will. Their response was to attempt the most ambitious and dangerous strategy they had used all day. Instead of trying to run time off the clock or settle for a safe play, they threw the ball deep downfield to their fastest receiver, who was covered by 2 defenders and running toward the most treacherous part of the field. The throw required perfect timing, exceptional accuracy, and absolute trust between quarterback and receiver. The catch required the receiver to maintain focus while knowing he would be hit immediately by 2 defenders moving at maximum speed. Both humans executed their roles flawlessly. The receiver caught the ball in stride, absorbed a collision that would have disabled most galactic species, and advanced another 15 yards before being brought down. The crowd's response was so loud that it triggered emergency protocols on several pieces of HFY equipment. But it was what happened during the next timeout that provided the most disturbing insight yet into human psychology. Both teams gathered in small groups to discuss their final strategies. The aliens expected to see exhaustion, desperation, or fear. Instead, they observed something that challenged their understanding of how intelligent beings were supposed to respond to extreme pressure. The humans were laughing. Not hysteria or nervous breakdown, but genuine enjoyment of the situation they found themselves in. They were embracing the pressure, the physical punishment, and the uncertainty of outcome as if these were positive experiences to be savored. Dave, Zektar asked desperately, why do they appear happy? Dave looked at him as if the answer was obvious. Because this is what they've trained for their whole lives. This is the moment that makes all the pain and sacrifice worthwhile. There's nowhere else any of these guys would rather be right now. The concept was incomprehensible to HFY thinking. Rational beings sought to minimize stress, avoid pain, and ensure predictable outcomes. These humans seem to view maximum stress, inevitable pain, and uncertain outcomes as the most desirable possible circumstances. With 30 seconds remaining, the trailing team had one final opportunity to score. They faced the same choice that had been presented throughout the quarter: conservative strategy with reasonable success probability, or maximum risk with maximum potential reward. They chose maximum risk. The play they designed required 5 different players to execute precise movements at exact timing, while under pressure from 11 opponents who knew exactly what was at stake. Any single error would result in immediate failure. As the ball was put into play, Zektar found himself leaning forward despite every instinct telling him to retreat from what he was witnessing. The humans were attempting something that challenged the laws of physics and probability, in conditions that would have challenged their most advanced military equipment. The quarterback dropped back, scanning for an open receiver while 5 massive humans closed on his position. Instead of throwing quickly to the safest option, he waited for the play to develop fully, absorbing a hit that registered as moderate assault on the HFY sensors. He threw the ball while falling. The receiver, running a precisely timed route, caught the ball in the end zone while 3 defenders converged on his position. The catch required him to maintain concentration while knowing he would immediately be hit by multiple opponents. He held onto the ball. The stadium erupted into noise that the HFY's audio equipment couldn't properly process. 100,000 humans were experiencing simultaneous emotional peaks that created effects the aliens had never witnessed in any species. But the most disturbing part was still to come. As the successful team celebrated their victory, their opponents, the humans who had just experienced devastating defeat in front of millions of observers, didn't respond with the violence, desperation, or breakdown that HFY psychology would have predicted. They congratulated their opponents. Individual members of both teams sought each other out to acknowledge the quality of competition they had just shared. Players who had been engaged in ritualized combat minutes earlier were embracing and expressing mutual respect for each other's efforts. They honor their enemies after defeat, HFY whispered. Even in loss, they maintain codes of conduct that prioritize respect over revenge. Zektar watched in amazement as the losing team's players sought out specific opponents to acknowledge exceptional plays they had witnessed. The quarterback who had thrown the game-winning pass was approached by the defenders who had been trying to stop him, not for retaliation, but for recognition of his skill under pressure. The crowd, meanwhile, was celebrating not just their team's victory but the quality of the contest they had all shared. Fans of both teams were acknowledging that they had witnessed something special, a display of human capability under maximum pressure that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dave, Zektar asked weakly, this behavior is normal after these contests? Absolutely normal. These guys have been competing against each other for years. They understand what it takes to perform at this level. Win or lose, you respect the effort and the courage it took for everyone to be here. As the fourth quarter ended and the humans began leaving the field, Zektar realized that everything the Kethvar Empire thought it knew about warfare, psychology, and civilization was going to need revision. These beings had developed social structures that turned individual suffering into collective strength, competition into mutual respect, and maximum pressure into optimal performance. They had evolved beyond the survival instincts that governed every other known species, creating something that transcended traditional understanding of intelligent behavior. The final realization was still to come, and it would change everything about how the galaxy viewed Earth and its inhabitants. As the stadium began to empty, Zektar and his warriors stood motionless among the departing human crowd, their weapons hanging forgotten at their sides. What they had witnessed over the past 3 hours had fundamentally altered their understanding of intelligence, civilization, and what it meant to be an apex species. The humans filing past them were laughing, discussing the game's highlights, and making plans for future gatherings. Children who had watched the entire contest were reenacting plays, their small bodies mimicking the violent collisions they had seen with enthusiasm rather than fear. "Commander," Valdos said quietly, "we need to discuss immediate tactical implications." Dave, still energized by the game's excitement, overheard. "Hey, I hope you guys got some good footage for your documentary. That was one hell of a game. The viewers are going to love seeing how intense human sports can get." Zektar looked at Dave, the small, unarmed human who had spent 4 hours casually interacting with 40 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators without ever showing fear. Dave represented everything that was wrong with the Kethvar's assumptions about Earth. "Dave," Zektar said slowly, "hypothetically speaking, how do you think your species would respond to external threats?" Dave considered this seriously. "You mean like an invasion?" "Well, historically we don't do great with being told what to do by outsiders. Americans in particular get pretty stubborn when someone tries to push us around. We've got a whole culture built around the idea that freedom is worth fighting for." Thekvar stepped closer. "And the level of resistance that external forces might encounter?" "Oh man," Dave laughed, "you'd better bring your A game. Americans have been training for that scenario since 1776. Every guy with a hunting rifle thinks he's a potential guerrilla fighter, every veteran knows actual combat tactics, and we've got more privately owned firearms than most countries have soldiers." The implications hit the Kethvar like a physical blow. They had assumed they were dealing with a primitive species that would be awed by superior technology. Instead, they had discovered a civilization that had spent centuries preparing for exactly the kind of conflict the Empire specialized in. "How many of your people have military training?" Kelshawn asked. "Current military is maybe 2 million active duty, but we've got over 20 million veterans who've served in various conflicts. Plus law enforcement, private security, hunters, sport shooters, martial arts practitioners. Probably 30 million Americans with some level of combat-relevant experience." 30 million. The number was staggering. The entire Kethvar military consisted of fewer than 5 million warriors, and they were supposed to conquer a planet with 30 million beings who had combat training and apparently viewed violence as entertainment. "But that's just the formal training," Dave continued cheerfully. "Every American kid grows up playing contact sports, video games with military themes, and hearing stories about our military history. We're kind of a warrior culture, if you think about it." Zektar felt his secondary heart stop entirely. A warrior culture with over 300 million members, advanced industrial capacity, and social conditioning that celebrated courage under pressure rather than submission to authority. "Commander," Valdos whispered urgently, "we need to return to the ship immediately." As they began moving toward the exit, Dave called after them. "Hey, if you want to see some really intense human competition, you should film a hockey game or a martial arts tournament. Or better yet, come back during military training exercises. That might be more what you're looking for." The thought of humans engaging in even more violent activities than what they had just witnessed was too much for several of the warriors. Thekvar actually stumbled, and Kelshawn's claws were retracting involuntarily. Outside the stadium, as they walked through the parking area where thousands of humans were still celebrating, Zektar called for an immediate tactical conference. "Assessment," he demanded. Valdos spoke first, consulting his extensive notes. "Commander, every assumption in our invasion planning appears to be fundamentally flawed. These humans demonstrate psychological conditioning that makes them unsuitable for standard conquest protocols." "Explain." "Standard doctrine assumes that primitive species will surrender when faced with superior technology and firepower. These humans appear to be psychologically incapable of surrender. They view overwhelming odds as motivation rather than deterrent. Thekvar added his observations. Moreover, their social structures turn individual losses into collective motivation. Eliminating their leaders or inflicting casualties would likely increase their resistance rather than break their will to fight. Kalunderskorshan's report was even more disturbing. Commander, their communication networks and organizational capabilities far exceed intelligence estimates. They can coordinate millions of individuals for entertainment purposes. Their potential for military coordination is significant. Zektar processed this information while watching human families load into vehicles around them. Children who had spent hours watching ritualized violence were chattering excitedly about their favorite moments. Parents were already planning to attend similar events. There's something else, Commander, Veldos said quietly. The psychological profiles we observed today suggest these humans might actually enjoy fighting against superior numbers. Everything about their culture seems designed to celebrate underdogs defeating more powerful opponents. The observation was accurate and terrifying. Human entertainment was filled with stories about smaller forces defeating larger ones, individuals overcoming impossible odds, and heroes who fought harder when everything seemed lost. They've culturally programmed themselves to view our invasion as the ultimate entertainment opportunity, Thekvar realized. They won't see us as conquerors to be feared, they'll see us as the challenge they've been training for their entire lives. As they reached their ship, Zektar made a decision that would have been unthinkable when they had landed 6 hours earlier. Begin immediate departure procedures, he ordered. All personnel return to ship. We're leaving. His communications officer looked confused. Commander, we haven't established the beachhead. Invasion protocols are suspended indefinitely, Zektar cut him off. This planet is designated unsuitable for conquest operations. As the ship lifted off, Zektar composed his report to High Command. The message he sent would eventually change the Empire's entire approach to galactic expansion. Priority transmission to Fleet Command. Earth reconnaissance complete. Invasion recommendation. Negative species designation. Human demonstrates psychological and cultural characteristics incompatible with conquest protocols. Preliminary observations suggest attempt to conquer would result in protracted conflict with unacceptable casualty projections. Specific concerns. Population demonstrates abnormal pain tolerance and aggression under pressure. Cultural conditioning celebrates resistance against superior force. Extensive combat training among civilian population. Social structures convert losses into motivation rather than demoralization. Technology level approaching threshold for space-based resistance. Population exceeds 300 million with significant combat capable. Percentage recommended classification. Avoid recommended strategy. Diplomatic contact only. Recommended timeline, indefinite postponement. Additional note, species appears to engage in ritualized combat for entertainment purposes. Suggest any future contact personnel receive specialized psychological preparation for interaction with beings who view violence as recreational activity. End transmission. 3 days later, Zektar received a response from High Command requesting clarification on his unusual recommendations. He sent back footage from the football game with a single additional note. This is what they do for fun on weekends. Imagine what they would do to protect their families. No response was ever received to that transmission. The Kethvar Empire quietly removed Earth from all target lists and established a permanent avoid designation for the entire Sol system. When other galactic civilizations inquired about the Empire's expansion plans for Sector 7, they were told that the region had been determined to be unsuitable for development. Word spread quickly through galactic civilization about the planet that had somehow convinced the Empire's most elite warriors to retreat without firing a shot. Various species sent their own reconnaissance missions to investigate these mysterious humans. Most returned with similar recommendations to avoid the system entirely. A few never returned at all. Dave, meanwhile, went back to work on Monday and told his co-workers about the weird cosplayers he'd met at the game. He never did figure out what happened to their documentary, but he hoped it had turned out well. The special effects had been pretty impressive. On the following Saturday, Dave went to another football game. Just like millions of other humans, he spent another afternoon celebrating the voluntary participation of young men in ritualized combat, cheering their willingness to sacrifice their bodies for strategic objectives, and honoring those who demonstrated courage under pressure. It was, by human standards, a perfectly normal weekend. By galactic standards, it was a demonstration of why some species were better left alone. Years later, when Earth finally developed the technology for interstellar travel and humans began exploring the galaxy, they were surprised by how cooperative most alien civilizations seemed to be. They attributed it to good diplomacy and mutual respect. They never knew that dozens of species had classified them as the most terrifying form of intelligent life anyone had ever encountered. And that was probably for the best. After all, humans thought they were just being friendly.